Those Days with the Monsters. Part 31. The entire bay went silent. Everyone looked towards Sleepy. Kirrel could sense more than see Alex's muscles tensing, as if she wanted to fight something. Sleepy had closed his eyes. Was the question that bad? I want to say it's a last resort. We don't want to use it, you know.
Is it from that story you told me earlier? The evil ruler and the 7 small creatures, and the iron shoes?
If it was, the metaphor was obvious, if insane, to transform the ground their feet touched into red-hot burning matter. A pair of red-hot iron shoes for a malicious ruler to dance in. But no, there had to be a lot more stories with iron shoes. It couldn't actually mean that, right? After a moment, Sleepy nodded. Yeah. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. Kirrel wondered why. Something with the name Ironshoes should be talked about in roars, in thunder and fire, not softly as if talking to a juvenile.
Will there be a planet when it's done?
Kirrel wanted to be wrong. He wanted to be crazy. He wanted the humans to have not done something like this. And most of all, he didn't want to have the kind of mind that could understand something that awful. Well, it'll exist. It won't be habitable. Kirrel's heart sank. He'd wanted to be wrong so very badly.
I see.
He tried not to imagine it being used, but he couldn't help it. The Khumans wouldn't use it on farm worlds, of course. But what about other planets? Was he watching the end of a species? And how would the galaxy react to the creatures that use something like iron shoes? Sleepy's hand touched Kirrel's head gently. Kirrel pulled away slightly. He didn't want to be distracted or comforted, not with something like this. Not right now. Spaceman, I promise, this is a last resort only. You know we don't like to hurt innocent folks with the guilty ones, right? Kirrel wanted to agree. He really did, but...
I don't know anymore, Sleepy. Iron shoes?
He swallowed hard, his frills a deep red shade. After a moment, words almost fell out of his mouth, spoken before he knew what he said.
I'm scared. I don't understand. I don't know if I want to understand. And I'm scared.
Sleepy sighed, stepped away from the wall and put a hand on Kirrel's shoulder. Here, follow me, spaceman. We need to talk, and I don't think you wanted to be in front of everyone. Reluctantly, Kirrel found himself following Sleepy to the dining area. As Sleepy approached a table, Kirrel stepped back slightly. He didn't want to make himself comfortable. It didn't feel right. Alright, spaceman. Whatever you need. Sleepy had his back to the table, half sitting and half leaning against it. The thing is, Kirrel, we've done this before. Humans have, I mean. Kirrel's frills flared slowly, the edges black, his neck dyed a deep, sorrowful blue.
You've killed planets?
Not these humans, surely. Not these ones. They had been kind. Not these ones. Nah, that's not what I mean. Sleepy sighed, staring slightly to the right of Kirrel at what looked like nothing. I mean, we've carried crazy weapons around before. Total annihilation, total disaster, but aside from the first use, nothing came of it. Kirrel's frills pulsed black, red, blue.
What do you mean, the first use?
There was a war. Nobody really understood what the weapons would do as yet. We just thought they made a big explosion. But it turns out they did way more than that. And we decided we didn't like that so well. And we realized it was probably better not to use them. Then some of us on a different side got the same weapon. And it turned into a standoff until we figured out how to talk to each other. Both sides held on to them for a while though. Sleepy shook his head slightly. All that to say, that it's not the first time humans have had a last resort weapon. And we know, and we mean, last resort. We know the collateral damage would be high. Using Ironshoes is the last thing we want to do. Kirrel took a moment to process this information. He had thought the Khumans were comfortable with death and war, so why would they hold back from an impossibly powerful weapon? Finally, quietly, he mumbled,
Khumans are gentler than I thought.
Some of us a bit less so. Sleepy shrugged. I'm not qualified to comment on that one myself. His face looked sad, but not sad. Kirrel wasn't sure what to call this face. It felt like the equivalent of the faint blue edge on most rollaways frills, a kind of sadness carried long enough to stop looking quite like sadness. After another minute or two of quiet, Kirrel sat down at the table.
I heard some things.
His frills pulsed a nervous yellow.
I promise I wasn't meaning to be a spy. It didn't seem like a good time to go in and...
Sleepy seemed to not even breathe for just a moment. What do you hear, spaceman? His voice had a slight edge to it. Kirrel felt his frills flaring in alarm.
Not much. Just that Operation Woodsman and Operation Washerwoman, the other Khuman thought there was a difference. What's the difference?
Sleepy sighed and sat down as well, covering his face with his hands. That's not too easy to explain. After a minute, he brought his hands down and took a deep breath. There's another story, an old one with a girl who goes to her grand's house and meets a wolf. Kirrel's translator helpfully added that the wolf was a predator native to the Khumans' Earth. The wolf tries to eat her. In the children's version, it does eat her, and it ate her grand too, but a woodsman shows up and kills it, and saves both the girl and her gran, who are still alive in its stomach. He glanced over to Kirrel, whose frills were stained a dark brown. Agreed, it's gross. The story that's not for kids isn't as violent, it's just... well, it's not for kids in a different way. I don't know how old you are, but I'm not going into that one with you. A bit of orange made it to Kirrel's frills through the brown. He was an adult. He had heard and seen things that would drive most Ylem insane on this ship. He didn't need to be babied. But Sleepy was still talking, so Kirrel pushed his irritation aside and listened. Anyway, in the other version, the girl escapes on her own and runs away from the wolf. She reaches a river where washerwomen are cleaning sheets, and they throw them over the water so she can run across them. And then the wolf tries to follow the girl, and the washerwomen pull the sheets out from under him, and he drowns. Kirrel shivered. That wasn't too pleasant either. He hadn't really thought too carefully about drowning, even though he knew most spacefaring sapients could.
So when you call it Operation Washerwoman... No, that doesn't make sense. The sapients on Khazurkan didn't run away themselves. You had to save them.
Sleepy tilted his head slightly. Well, that's true too. The difference in this case depends less on the girl and more on the wolf. After a minute, Kirrel realized Sleepy was waiting for him to say something. He was about to object that he hadn't gotten a real answer, but something about the way Sleepy was sitting, leaning forward, his eyes fixed intently on Kirrel, gave him pause. It was like Sleepy was waiting, not just for Kirrel's response, but for something specific.
So the wolf is the Tizzix?
Sleepy nodded. His face still looked serious, but something about the eyes had changed. Almost as if they'd gotten a bit clearer, a bit happier. Kirrel thought they might even be reflecting light differently, though he hadn't paid much attention to how Khuman eyes reflected light. The translator didn't seem to pick up on the difference, but Kirrel thought Sleepy looked almost excited. That didn't make any sense though.
And the girl, it's supposed to be the sapients, like on Khazurkan?
At Sleepy's slight nod, Kirrel felt his frills turning silver as he concentrated on the question.
So, if it depends on the wolf, then woodsman would be if we went down and handled the Tizzicks, and washerwoman as if the Tizzicks...
His head was spinning slightly, but he felt so close. Sleepy almost didn't seem to be breathing.
If we get the Tizzicks to run over the sheets?
Sleepy leaned back, his teeth bared wide, letting out a deep breath. There you go, spaceman. His voice was quiet, but Kirrel thought it might also be excited. You're not half bad, you know. It took 3 tries to explain the difference to Grumpy. Kirrel still was pretty sure he didn't understand. The Tizzicks had their own firmly established area of the universe. He didn't think they'd be going into Khuman-controlled space much, if ever, after Kazurkan. But Sleepy looked happy, and for the moment that would be enough. Well, almost enough.
Oh, Sleepy. Alex said something strange, and I was wondering...
If I translate? I can translate for you. What was it?
Why would Alex not want to explain the word nitpicky to me?
To Kirrel's alarm, Sleepy buried his face in his hands. Oh, Alex, why did you? You had to do this to me, for the love of... Hastily, Kirrel found himself interrupting.
Never mind. I don't think I want to know anymore.
Thank you for listening to Those Days with the Monsters, Part 31. Read by me, A Good Bee.